There is a fascinating, almost invisible magic trick at the heart of early 3D sports video games. When we watch a real baseball game broadcast on a television, our eyes naturally focus on the dramatic, isolated duel between a pitcher and the batter. It looks deceptively simple: two guys staring each other down, a ball thrown in a straight line, and a swing. But when a team of mid-90s software developers sat down to translate that experience into a 32-bit digital space, they ran headfirst into an absolute technical nightmare. They weren't just rendering a simple, predictable corridor or a flat fighting arena with two characters. They had to build an entire sprawling stadium filled with thousands of simulated fans, track a tiny white ball moving at immense speeds across multiple axes, and calculate the physics of 9 individual defensive players all reacting simultaneously to a dynamic physics trajectory. On the original PlayStation, achieving this balance felt almost impossible. The hardware architecture was notoriously stubborn, forcing developers to make brutal compromises. If you pushed the console too hard to give you detailed, anatomically correct player models, the frame rate would immediately chug to an unplayable crawl the second the ball was hit into the deep outfield and multiple assets had to move at once. On the flip side, if you focused entirely on smooth, responsive gameplay and a steady frame rate, the stadium and the turf turned into a blocky, unreadable mess of jagged pixels where you couldn't tell the shortstop from the second baseman. Early developers couldn't just rely on raw processing power to bail them out of a bad optimization job. Instead, they had to become master illusionists, utilising clever visual force camera perspectives and highly creative engine design to make the human player believe they were controlling a seamless living television broadcast. What makes this specific corner of the console's library so incredibly compelling isn't just one standalone classic or a single nostalgic masterpiece, it is the rolling timeline of the technology itself. Over a massive 9-game marathon, Sony's flagship baseball series became a living, breathing blueprint of the entire lifecycle of the hardware. By looking at this massive run of titles back to back, we aren't just tracking the basic seasonal roster updates, minor stat adjustments, or shifting menu colour schemes. We are watching a single piece of hardware grow up, push past its own boundaries, and eventually fight against its own obsolescence. We are going to watch this specific engine evolve from flat, paper-thin 2D sprites running awkwardly across a 3D field, straight through the blocky drawing of full polygon models, past the golden era of feature creep, and all the way to the absolute final first-party curtain call of the mid-2000s. The stadium lights are on, the dirt is kicked up, and the massive multi-year sports evolution is about to step up the plate. Welcome to the PSX Index. I'm Parasine, and this is the show where I play and document all 1,278 PS1 games released across Northern America, and this episode is Index entries 218 through to 226. We are stepping right into the dugout of Sony's own signature sports franchise. To kick off this massive 9-game marathon, we have to go all the way back to summer of 1996 with MLB Pennant Race. Developed by Sony Interactive Studios America, this was the rough, highly ambitious blueprint that started it all. Long before the series locked into its familiar yearly numbering format, Pennant Race was tasked with a monumental corporate mission. It had to prove that the PlayStation could deliver an authentic, fully licensed Major League Baseball experience that could compete with and ultimately dethrone the established arcade giants that ruled the sports genre at the time. As a first-time experience looking at the starting line, the game stands as a beautifully hilarious contradiction of compelling technologies. It bridges the gap between the 16-bit era and the 32-bit future by pasting highly detailed, pre-rendered 2D player sprites directly onto a fully 3D polygonal stadium layout. The result is a fascinating visual warp that you have to see to believe. When a batter connects and the ball is snapped into the deep outfield, the camera pans smoothly across the fully realised 3D stadium park, while your paper-thin cardboard cutout fielders sprint sideways across the glass like ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics. It is experimental, a bit mechanically clunky, and completely charming in its execution. We are laying down the literal baseline for the next decade of digital baseball, proving that the concept would work even if the technology was still finding its feet.
That was a slider. 1 ball, 1 strike. There's a drive to right field. It hits the wall. He throws to third. A runner scores. It's an RBI double. Runner on second. Up next, Jose Canseco.
The subsequent releases of MLB 98 and 99 marked the exact moment the franchise finally grew up, completely abandoning the hybrid 2D sprite compromise to embrace the full, unfiltered potential of 3D polygon models. Stepping onto the field with these two specific entries gives a first-time player a front row seat at the massive visual revolution. The paper-thin athletes from Pennant Race were completely thrown in the bin, replaced with fully realised 3D models that actually possess physical presence and weight. For the first time, these digital players cast dynamic real-time shadows on the dirt and grass, instantly transforming the experience into a premium, modern simulation rather than an old-school arcade port. This visual shift wasn't just cosmetic, it completely transformed how the game played defensively. Because the fielders were now actual 3D objects moving through the cohesive 3D environment, the physics of field became vastly more precise and intuitive. You could actually judge the trajectory of a high, towering fly ball, track its growing shadow against an outfield wall, and execute a desperate diving catch into the gap with actual spatial awareness. MLB 99 took this mechanical foundation even further by introducing proper support for the DualShock analog controller. Instead of relying on rigged digital directional traps that made your player run in jagged 80-degree angles, you could gently guide your fielder into position with analog precision. Beyond the math of the physics engine, this specific error established the atmospheric identity that would define the entire series. This was the exact moment Sony pulled off a massive production coup by bridging in the legendary broadcaster Vince Scully to provide dynamic play-by-play commentary. Hearing a real, iconic voice react to a dynamic grand slam or a critical full count third strike completely masked the technical limitations of the graphics. It stopped feeling like a simple video game loop and started mimicking the comfort and flow of the live television broadcast. By grouping these two foundational titles together, you can clearly see the developers working out the exact core mechanics that would govern the sports genre for the next decade. They successfully built a stable, fully 3D sports engine that could handle the scale of a Major League park without dropping critical frames, beautifully setting the stage for the absolute peak of the series on the console.
Hitting next, Ray Sanchez. From the stretch, could be. It's off the top of the wall. It's a 3-run shot.
When you boot up MLB 2000 and 2001, you are looking at a development studio operating at the absolute peak of their technical powers. By the turn of the millennium, the programmers had spent half a decade wrestling with the internal architecture of the PlayStation, and they finally knew exactly how to squeeze every single micro drop of performance out of the aging 32-bit console. This specific era wasn't about making massive risky architectural gambles or reinventing the wheel anymore. It was about taking a rock-solid, proven foundation and polishing it until it shined, introducing advanced gameplay mechanics that added an incredible layer of cerebral depth into the simulation. The most important mechanical evolution came down to the classic duel between the pitcher and the batter. MLB 2000 completely threw out the old, simplistic guessing game logic of early sports titles and replaced it with a highly sophisticated total control system. Pitching suddenly required genuine tactical strategy, forcing you to manage specific release points, break patterns, and varying pitch speeds to actively keep hitters off balance. For the batter, the game introduced realistic hot and cold zones mapped directly onto the grid, pulled from real-time player statistics. If you tried to swing at a high and inside fastball with a hitter who statistically struggled in that specific quadrant, your window for solid contact plummeted drastically. It suddenly shifted the gameplay loop from pure arcade-style twitch reflexes and turned it into a deeply rewarding chess match. Visually, MLB 2001 pushed the boundaries of what anyone thought the console was capable of handling by introducing actual face scanning technology. Now, by modern standards, these faces look like terrifying, low-resolution masks slapped on blocky templates. But in 2000, it was mind-blowing. Prominent superstars didn't just look like generic faceless drones differentiated only by their jersey numbers. They had distinct, recognisable facial textures, combined with unique signature batting stances and specific pitching motions for elite players. The illusion of reality was tighter than ever. This pair of games represents the absolute sweet spot for sports simulations on the hardware. The loops were fast, the logic was deep, and the presentation felt genuinely premium. It was the definitive high watermark of the franchise, achieving a level of mechanical harmony that would soon face a whole new set of technical challenges as the console entered its inevitable twilight years.
Quick throw to first. Safe. Line shot hit deep into right field. Routine play.
The right fielder got into that ball and had no problem with it.
Batting third, Bob Abreu.
The transition into MLB 2002, 3 and 4 drops a player directly into a fascinating, highly experimental technical twilight zone. By the time these specific titles were hitting store shelves, the PlayStation 2 had already completely taken over the global market, shifting the entire industry's focus towards the next generation visuals, high fidelity audio, and massive DVD capacity storage. Yet because the original reliable PlayStation 1 still possessed a massive, fiercely local active player base, Sony chose to keep churning out these yearly legacy editions. The developers were handed a wild, almost unfair technical challenge. They had to find a way to make an ancient 32-bit engine look, feel, and sound like the modern, ultra-flashy sports games released on the superior next-gen hardware. The result is a masterclass in visual compression and incredibly clever interface design. To bridge this glaring generational gap, the program has completely overhauled the menus, the broadcast presentation packages, and the in-game telemetry systems to perfectly mimic the sleek, blue, and metallic aesthetic of the next-generation versions. When you are sitting in the team selection screen or analysing the statistical overlays between innings, the game genuinely tricks your brain into thinking you are playing a much newer, more advanced piece of software. Once you actually step onto the diamond and throw the first pitch, however, the physical reality of the old hardware immediately sets in. The core gameplay engine across these 3 entries was essentially locked down tight, with the development team focusing their limited resources on tuning player data, shifting rosters, and adjusting baseline physics metrics rather than introducing massive mechanical overhauls. They literally couldn't add more polygons to the stadium geometry without crashing the console, so they used highly compressed textures and smarter, more saturated light and tones to make the fields look more cleaner and sharper. It is a deeply compelling look at a studio squeezing blood from a technical stone, proving that a sports engine built on a great fundamental design could easily maintain its integrity, keeping players firmly hooked to their old controllers even as a new generation of gaming dawns right outside their windows.
And he powers a deep drive. Going. Adios, a home run. A one-run shot.
Yeah, I wouldn't doubt it. That thing is still going. What a blast.
Up next, Fred McGriff. The windup and the pitch. Routine fly ball hit to center. He's safe.
The pitcher tried to ride it into the handsman, but he had enough power to fight it off with a single.
A man on, one out. Comes to the plate looking to make something happen. Brian Jordan. The pitcher looks and delivers. Drifting left, foul.
When MLB 2005 arrived on retail shelves, it marked the end of a massive historical chapter for the console. It wasn't just another routine yearly roster updated designed to hit a quarterly financial target. It was the absolute final first-party software title ever developed and published by Sony Computer Entertainment for the original PlayStation. By the mid-2000s, the hardware was undeniably ancient and an artifact of bygone era. But this final release stood as a proud monument to a full decade of accumulated programming knowledge. It wrapped the entire 9-game journey into an incredibly polished, stable package, delivering the definitive ultimate version of 32-bit baseball. 226 games down, 1,052 to go, with the final strike officially called and the stadium lights fading on our massive sports marathon. We are hanging up our cleats and pivoting right back into the vibrant world of licensed cinema. For the next block of the index, we are opening up a massive, dusty vault of childhood nostalgia as we kick off the Disney Bundle Part 4. We will be covering a massive 8-game gauntlet of 2001 animated adaptations, tracking the exact moment the House of Mouse pushed the limits of the aging console. Our marathon will take us straight through the platforming sands of Disney's Aladdin in Nasara's Revenge, the frantic, surprisingly tight tracks of Toy Story Racer, the rhythmic, sweat-inducing grooves of Dance Dance Revolution Disney Mix, and the proud lands of The Lion King, Simba's Mighty Adventure. From there, we will dive into the cinematic, atmospheric action of Atlantis The Lost Empire, explore the chaotic, bizarre minigames of Goofy's Funhouse, harvest scares in Monsters Inc. Scream Team, and finish off with Pooh's party game, In Search of the Treasure. It is a huge showcase of creative variety, charting how the biggest animation studio on Earth wrapped up its legendary run on the hardware. If you enjoyed tracking this multi-year baseball evolution from its flat 2D roots to its final 3D inning, make sure to smash that like button, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our upcoming Disney Marathon, and drop a comment below. Let me know which year of the Sony MLB era you spent most of the time with back in the day. A massive special thanks goes out to the channel members whose incredible ongoing support keeps this massive documentary mission moving forward every single week. Your backing is the real backbone of the index. Grab your mouse ears, dust off your memory cards. I'll see you back here at entry 227.